The Prowler, Part 7. I was awakened by James this morning, informing me that he disposed of Liza's body near the Thames. How perfect, I thought. Quite the suitable resting place, as to now she'll be with all the other miscreants and riffraff. Rest in peace, you filthy animal. I wiped the slumber from my eyes as James sat the tray down with my morning paper and cup of coffee. I flattened the paper to get a proper look at the headline, and once again I was pleased to see my handiwork festooned over the front page. Prowler does the unthinkable, kills shop owner at charity benefit. Damn right I did, I fiendishly thought. But alas, that's what I do. I do the unthinkable. I am without reason. I am without mercy. Now let's see what else the illuminating columnist Parker Johns has to say in detail of my latest escapade of death, shall we? I am very sad to report, ladies and gentlemen, the murder of an upstanding gentleman and one of the West End's finest proprietors, Mr. Gerald Hughes, of Mr. Hughes' pastry shop, was sadly found in the back of his shop, decapitated, I horrifically must report, and on the walls written in his own blood, said no one escapes the Prowler. Such savagery on such a kind soul like Mr. Hughes is unthinkable, yet here we are, another unthinkable death in a long line perpetrated by the Prowler. There were no eyewitness reports as for Mr. Hughes' closed-up shop alone. Scotland Yard believes, though, whoever is the Prowler attended the event at the shop and waited for the opportune time to strike. It could have been anyone, however. Reports are that the shop was filled with countless numbers of people all day for the event, and reportedly made quite a nice sum of money for the grieving family of Constable Wilkins. There was also rumored that a very prominent member of society stopped to pay his respects, a man of nobility, if you will, and it is believed that he made a sizable donation, but that isn't known for certain. The lead inspector of the Prowler slayings, Mr. Clive Richards, informs me he is going to begin a painstaking process of trying to track down and interview as many people who attended the event as possible. Godspeed, sir. We all are hoping you discover pertinent information that will finally bring the Prowler to justice. Until tomorrow, dear readers, stay safe. Ah, I would love to have the chance to meet this Inspector Richards in person, to match wits, if you will. I'm sure someone he comes across in his interviews will mention that I attended the affair. The only question is, will he have the testicular fortitude to question someone of my noble standing? The policeman's ball that my family is throwing in a few short days might give me the best opportune moment to finally meet this Inspector Clive Richards. I wouldn't be shocked if he were to interview me. That would be the forum he chose to do it in. I proceeded to get out of bed and prepare myself for the day's events. I got dressed and went downstairs for a proper breakfast. The household was abuzz with preparations for the upcoming policeman's ball. As I moved about the manor, I heard some idle chit-chat coming from my father and the head butler of the house, Mr. Lyles, as they were discussing the whereabouts of the young maid Liza. I overheard my father asking Mr. Lyles if anyone had seen young Liza, and I had to stop and chuckle at that point, but only in my head, only to myself. I must put on a believable act after all. If someone is to ask me of her whereabouts, I will know nothing of it. What you say, Liza is missing? Oh, my word! Whatever could have happened to her? I sat and enjoyed my breakfast, daydreaming of some of my past slayings, anxious to get back out on the cobblestone streets of the West End. salivating at the thought of my blade ripping into the flesh of my next victim. Now I must admit, these were not proper mealtime thoughts from such an upstanding gentleman as myself, but I could give two shits. There's nothing wrong with enjoying one's hobby. I believe everyone should have one, and I want back out there. I need to be out there. I finished breakfast, leaving before I got stuck into another boring doldrums of a conversation with my father, clamoring about God knows what, and hurried back upstairs into my chambers. Once inside, I picked up my bag and emptied its contents onto my writing desk. My surgical blade, my hatchet, and my revolver were strewn about the table, glistening as a ray of sunshine that peeked through my window hit them. They were a beacon calling to me, like a lighthouse's light calling a ship in from the fog. My tools are important, and they must be taken care of. I polished them and made sure they were in fine working order, and finished preparing for tonight. As the sun set, I grabbed my bag, put on my cloak and top hat, and made my way to the carriage. I informed James to take me to Denmark Street for tonight. I will paint its streets red with the blood of whoever crosses my path. As I stepped out of the carriage, I was greeted with the thickest fog I had ever seen. As I made my way down the street, I noticed there wasn't a soul to be seen, and the only ones out were the constables, which seemed to be more than usual. There was nothing I could do. I stood there in front of Mr. Yu's boarded-up pastry shop, filling with rage. No one out to kill, and seemingly every constable on the force walking the streets. I made this goddamn journey for nothing. I stormed back to the carriage, trying to keep my cool. I shouted at James to prepare to leave. He looked at me with a confused look on his face, shocked at how quick I was. I informed him not to say one word to me, or tonight he might be my victim. Thankfully, for his sake, he stayed quiet, and I was able to compose myself. Sadly, my macabre delights have continued to be put on hold these past few nights. The fog has continued to keep the people off the streets, and the police presence has been increased. But I have no worries, for I will soon be back out on those cobblestone streets in no time. I awoken this morning to the finishing touches of the policeman's ball for tonight. It's been over a fortnight since my journey has taken place, and I'm anxious for it to commence once again. 4 nights has been too long. Fog or no fog, I'm going out tonight. Or maybe I'll find someone at the ball to dispose of. Maybe even my date. I'll cross that bridge when it's time. But someone is most definitely feeling my blade tonight. As a matter of fact, I'll be keeping my surgical knife sheathed underneath my vest on the side. Then, if the moment strikes me, I'll be able to just carve someone up on the spot. I must clean up and make final preparations for the ball. Lady Brandy Lee Smith will arrive at the manor sharply at 7 o'clock, and I must look my best. The hour was approaching. I finished getting dressed in my party best attire. The tuxedo black, the cufflinks gold, the hair tightly slicked back, the mustache and goatee waxed accordingly. I was looking as a proper gentleman should look. I then took my surgical knife and slid it in its sheath, strapped to my vest, and then slipped on my tuxedo jacket. Now I was ready for the ball. I left my chambers at 10 minutes till 7 and patiently waited for Lady Smith at the front door. I saw her carriage approach, and as I took a quick glance at my pocket watch, the hands met at 7, right on time. Very impressive indeed. I stood there not fully expecting what to emerge from the carriage. loathing my familial duties at that very moment. The carriage door opened. I held my breath tightly, but to my pleasant surprise, out stepped an angel, the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. She truly had to have been one of the most beautiful women in all the realm. Then I quickly thought there wasn't a chance in hell that I was going to make her my next victim tonight. She was just too beautiful. No, there will be no harm done to Miss Smith. None at all. No, I must do all I can to get to know this tasty morsel a little better. I greeted her warmly with a respectful bow and asked for her arm. She smiled warmly and slightly nodded her head yes. I took her arm and proceeded to escort her into the party. We were announced as the Earl-in-Waiting, Lord Burlington, and Lady Smith. We then acknowledged the room and proceeded to move about the ball. We hobnobbed with some of the more important guests in the room, including my father, for a few short, excruciating minutes of a conversation where the man just blabbered on about our two families getting together, finally, and that we were the perfect match. We politely placated his musings and excused ourselves and went to find a quiet table in the corner to have a conversation. We found the perfect spot away from the crowd and began to find out about one another. The hours seemed to fly by as we were enthralled in our conversation. The more and more we found out about each other, it seemed to be that we were lovers in past lives. It was quite uncanny. It seemed we knew things about each other before even speaking them. The familiarity and closeness that we felt seemed like we had been together for lifetimes. It was quite strange. This entire time I've been with Lady Smith, I haven't even thought about murder. My mind has completely wandered from my macabre activities and has slowly been fixated on this beautiful woman. It was only broken by a conversation I heard from the left of me when someone loudly greeted the young inspector, Mr. Clive Richards. I sat there for a moment trying to listen, trying to hear the man who's in charge of the investigation trying to stop me. Sounds like. He and whoever greeted him began talking about the Prowler and the current status of the investigation. The inspector politely declined informing the guest that he could not divulge the current status of the investigation, for it was still ongoing. As it looked like the inspector was about to excuse himself from the conversation, I politely excused myself from the table with Lady Smith, promising to return shortly, then jumped up and greeted the inspector before he could get away. There I stood, face to face with the man Scotland Yard picked to investigate me and my devilish crimes. I introduced myself in what I believed to be a warm manner, shaking his hand and welcoming him to my family's party. He shook my hand and was very appreciative of me and my family's hospitality. We then stood there and had a conversation for a few minutes, getting to know one another. I tried to see what made the man tick. What were his interests? What kind of man he was? Generalities of his job, and so forth. Maybe even trying to probe around the Prowler investigation, but nothing direct, for I knew he would not divulge any clues. There was one thing he said that set my blood a-boil about the Prowler investigation, talking to me like I was a concerned citizen, and that's when he assured me I had nothing to fear, for he would catch this Prowler in no time, that the Prowler didn't have the skills to escape him and Scotland Yard for much longer. I tried to contain myself as he uttered the last word in that ridiculous sentence of agonizing bullshit. I felt the rage moving through my body. If he only knew that I was thinking of pulling my blade from my sheath and slicing it across his throat as he talked to me like some concerned upper-class barrel-chested woman who gave two shites if he caught the Prowler or not. Now I was focused on what preoccupied my mind earlier in the day, and that was blood, and whose I was going to be spilling tonight. As my mind and attention began to wander of murder and savage delights, the young inspector was called from our conversation by my father and brother. We said our goodbyes, and I sat back down at the table with Lady Smith. I sincerely apologized for stepping away, and inside, tried to compose myself and get my mind off murderous pursuits. Lady Smith graciously forgave me, and we continued with our conversation. As the musical entertainment began to play the midnight waltz, a very eerie and haunting piece of music, I asked Lady Smith if I may have this dance. She nodded her head in agreement and gave me her hand. We danced and continued to have the most excellent of times. We conversed and laughed the night away. I had never known anyone to make me feel the way that Lady Smith was making me feel. I wasn't thinking of death or murder, or filled with an uncontrollable rage. I was just thinking of her beauty that stood before me, and the love I was already starting to feel for her. As the ball began to wind down, I asked if we could see each other again. She said yes, of course, and we set a date in 2 days' time for a lovely quiet dinner for two. I then kissed her hand and wished her good night. I stood at the bottom of the steps in front of the manor and watched as her carriage drove off in the distance. I stood filled with a beautiful feeling I had never felt before, and already was anxious and eager to see her again. The other party guests began to pile out of the door and into their carriages. One by one they went, until there was no one left, or so I thought. As I turned to head back into the manor, I saw the young inspector, Mr. Richards, begin to stumble out of the front door. He was alone, and the bastard was quite drunk. There was no carriage waiting for him. I then noticed James in the corner of my eye, in the carriage house tending to his duties. I quickly came up with a most devilish plan. I shouted over to James to prepare the carriage, and I turned to the inspector and told him I would be honored to drive him home. What a perfect opportunity this is, I thought. I have the head inspector of the Prowler case about to be in my carriage of death alone. It's just simply perfect. James quickly pulled the carriage to the front of the manor, where we were waiting. We then piled in and drove off into the dark. The inspector was quite appreciative of my kindness and willingness to drive him home in his inebriative state. I said to think nothing of it. The pleasure definitely was all mine. We continued with some mindless chit-chat, but really, one cannot have a meaningful conversation with someone in a drunken state. After a while, the ride became silent, and after a few minutes in that silence, I broke it with the most fiendish of conversations. "So you'll catch the Prowler in no time, huh? He doesn't have the necessary skills to evade your intellect for much longer, you say?" The inspector mumbled something in agreement and said in a slurred speech that yes, I will catch this Prowler in no time. I then pulled my jacket flap to the side and reached for the sheath on the side of my vest. "Well, Inspector, you are right about one thing. You have finally found the Prowler, and as I told him that life-changing news, I slashed my blade across his throat, and as I did so, his eyes widened with a look of surprise. No doubt. He sat there and writhed in agony, bringing his hands up to his throat, trying to stop the blood. I sat there and laughed, congratulating him on finally solving the case. He then turned his head and looked at me, thinking God only knows what, completely confused, I'm sure, at the events that have just transpired. I then took my blade and finished the cocky inspector off, driving it into his ear, through his head, and out the other side. I then tossed the prick's body out of the carriage on the side of the road, and we returned home. Wait till everyone finds out about this, I thought. The head inspector of the Prowler case disposed of so easily. The man who was supposed to bring the Prowler to his demise. People are going to lose their shite. Now, they'll know it doesn't matter who you are or what you do in this life. No one can escape the Prowler. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.